Hello. So I'm finally back on YouTube, and today we're going to analyze a game that shows you what to do when you have an isolated pawn or what to do when your opponent has one. So let's get into it. I'm playing with the white pieces, and this is a blitz game. So I go e4 here, and my opponent plays e6, the French defense. I go d4, my opponent goes d5, and here I go for bishop d3. Bishop d3, this is known as the Schlechter variation, and this is a very rare variation, not much people play this, so, my opponents can get caught off guard by this move, so that's a nice little bonus of playing a rare opening. But anyway, my opponent plays c5, and this variation is pretty hard to play as black here, because the best continuation after e takes d5 is e takes d5, allowing me to go d takes c5 and bishop takes c5, and they have to play with this isolated pawn. And this is pretty hard to play, but still there's no clear way on how to actually punish this weakness here. But just to show you, they can already go wrong if they decide to take with the queen. Why? Because we can sacrifice the pawn, knight to c3 here, and if you decide to take this pawn over here, there's just bishop to e4, and the queen is just trapped. Like, it's a pretty nice queen trap. The bishop defends the rook, the knight controls these two squares, the pawn controls this, the queen controls this, the bishop controls this, and the bishop controls the g6 square. So the queen is actually trapped in this line. Another line they can go for is queen takes d4. But then you run into knight b5, hitting the queen and this weak c7 square over here. Queen d8 is probably their best option. And then we can probably just go bishop f4 here, and then they're forced to play knight a6 here. And for the lost pawn, we have huge compensation here because we're ahead in development. This knight is just doing nothing here. We can always develop the knight, So in the future, we can definitely win one of these pawns. Basically, we get a lot of compensation here. So after c5, e takes d5, e takes d5, d takes c5, and bishop takes c5, I just go knight to f3. And now I'm playing against an isolated pawn. And the general principle here is that when you're playing against the isolated pawn, you want to, first of all, trade pieces, but also have it so that, this d-pawn can never push. The d-pawn can never go to d4. You want to prevent that push as much as possible with the knight going to b3, c3, let's say bishop e3 even, queen d2, the long castle, and you move the bishop. This pawn is never going anywhere. It's just stuck there. So I go knight to f3, just developing, preparing to castle on the short side potentially, but, just taking control of this square a little. And also, my knight will always come to b3 here. They go knight to e7, so I castle. I decided to not castle long. I just decided to just simply castle here, because there's not much of an attack going on right now. They castle, and here I go knight bd2, and my plan is just simply knight b3, c3, c3, maybe even bishop b3 in the future, and we're just gonna trade a bunch of pieces, and we're gonna take control of the d4 square here. And this pawn is never going anywhere. It's just gonna be weak the whole game. So, after this move, they decide to go bishop to f5. They're like, okay, let's trade bishops. You don't want to take here, of course, because, the knight can end up in a better place. You don't really want this. So, I just decided to go, alright, I'll just continue with my plan. Knight b3. So, first of all, the knight hits the bishop. It's a tempo. And opens up the queen, so now it defends this pawn, so I don't ever have to ruin my pawn structure if they ever trade. And importantly, we can get a knight to d4. They decided to take the bishop, which is not good. Why isn't this a good move? Because once again, when you're playing with an isolated pawn, you want to keep as much pieces on the board. Because when in an endgame, let's say all of these pieces are gone, right here, basically the king can always hit this weakness. and the king is the only defender, and then maybe you can start pushing a bunch of pawns somewhere, and you can use this sort of weakness to try and flank on a different side. Like, let's say you're gonna go to the king side, so you get the point. You don't want to play with this weakness, so you don't want to trade much pieces. Obviously, it's not good to trade all of them, but when a lot of them are traded, it's just gonna be very easy to hit this pawn. They go bishop d6, just putting the bishop on this nice diagonal here. So I go c3, and this pawn, once again, never going to d4. There's no d4, because I have like 4 pieces here to control it. My opponent goes knight bc6, developing the knight. And here I decided, okay, I'm going to develop the bishop to e3 once again, taking even more control here. And if they do end up going knight to e5, I will not hesitate to trade here. This is just good for me, and then maybe even bishop d4 here to try and trade off the bishops. And if they take, obviously not taking with the pawn, with the knight here, and once again, we are playing against this isolated pawn. We can triple up on the d-file here, and it's just going to be very bad for black. So after bishop e3, they decided to go knight to g6 here, maybe potentially going here, and obviously I can't take this because of a nice Greek gift here. You can call it a Greek gift, whatever you want, but it's just a tactic to win the queen here. This is a very common tactic. I've fallen for it multiple times, and I will not fall for it again. Maybe I will, but basically, I've gotten traumatized by this, taking this free pawn, so I'm not gonna do that. So I just go rook a d1, basically saying, okay, you can't go knight to e5 now, because then I can just take this, and there's nothing. So after rook a d1, they decided to go knight c7, defending this, but now I decided to play g3. Another key thing about the knight going to g6 is I didn't really like it maybe going to f4 in the future. Maybe I can just take in that line, but I didn't really like that. So let's just play g3, limiting this knight. Maybe it can also end up at h4 at some point. And once again, if you ever start an attack, it's not good because I have queen and bishop lined up over here. The knight can come in, maybe you can go h4, h5. They went knight to e5 here, trading even more pieces, inaccurate. And after knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, I go bishop d4, and they take the bishop. And I don't really know why my opponent was doing this, but after I just go knight takes, I simply have an advantage here. You see, the engine is slowly starting to say that I'm about to be up a pawn here, because of the huge pressure that's about to come on the d-file. They go knight to c6, and their idea is that if I take, they're going to take back like this, and they don't have an isolated pawn anymore. Additionally, they have an open b-file to use to pressure this b-pawn. So obviously, I'm not going to take that, so I just go rook d2. Rook d2, the idea is to triple up. Maybe I can set up a potential Alekhine's gun, if you don't know what that is. That involves... Wait, let me just play random waiting moves. That involves something like this battery. As you can see, the queen is behind the 2 rooks here, and basically the pressure here is going to be a lot. There's going to be so much pressure here. So that's the idea of rook d2. They decided to go knight takes d4, but after this, queen takes d4, and this pawn is lost. They go rook e8, and I decided, okay, no need to be in a hurry. Like, this pawn's not going anywhere. I'm just going to calmly stack up on the d-file, because if I take now, like takes, they always have the d-file ready, maybe they can trade a bunch of rooks here, and I didn't want to give them the d-file. So I just decided, okay, let's just stack up here, hit the pawn, and we have a nice advantage. They go b6, I go queen takes d5, queen takes d5, rook takes d5, and this is a very much winning endgame, because the rook is going to end up on the 7th rank in the future. We have a queenside majority here. We can always use, and we have the d-file. So we're pretty much just active here. They go king f8, and I noticed that this rook could have ended up on the 2nd rank. So I just go king to f1. The idea is that, okay, I'm preventing you from infiltrating along this line. along the E line. They go f6. I guess the idea is just to go king to f7. They go a4. I go a4, and I noticed that this pawn structure pretty much weak because it's a fianchetto structure. One common pattern I always see when I'm playing any game, like for example, they played g6. There's always stuff like h4 incoming. There's always stuff like h4 coming in if it's on the king side with a fianchetto structure, and then if it's b6, a4, with an idea to go a5. So you get the point here. King to f1, f6. So I go a4. That is the idea behind this move. It's just to go a5 and try to create this weakness over here on a7 if they ever take. And they go king to f7. So I go a5. They go b takes a5. Trying to open up the b file here for some compensation. I just take. They go rook e b8. But that just allows rook d7 check, and they play king to e6 here. A little bit better was king to g6, so at least you defend this pawn. And if I take this, like right now, you can always win this pawn back, and suddenly it's a draw. Because this pawn is very weak, you can't really push this. There's the same side. There's a 3-on-3 on the king side with both kings on the king side as well. So this is just going to be a draw. Now you could have went for this. Instead, they played king e6, further simplifying the game. So I just go rook takes g7, rook takes b2, and rook takes h7. They go rook b1 check. I go king g2. They go rook c1. And now I take this pawn here, because after takes, I'm up 2 pawns. And additionally, with taking these 2 pawns on the king side earlier with the other rook, now I have an outside passer here. Very strong. So I just go h4. And I'm like, okay, let's push the pawn. They go king to f5, and if I ever let the king get to the g file here, it's not so clear. So I just decided, alright, let's just play rook g7 here, cut off the king, make sure it never gets there. They go rook a3, don't really know what the idea of that move was, so I just push the pawn, h5. They go rook a8, I go h6, they go rook h8, and now I go rook h7, and now I have made this rook incredibly passive here. They go king e6. So, I put the king on f3. I'm planning to bring the king into the action here. Maybe try to win this pawn. Maybe try to go all the way over to h6. And then like some rook h8. So, that is my idea. They decide to go f5. I go king to f4. They go king to f6, hitting the rook. I simply drop the rook back to a7. Excuse me. And here I go f3. And the idea is that if you take this, I just take, and you further simplify the game because I have 2 pawns here. And they're pushing. And you're just going to lose this game slowly. So after f3, they decide to go rook f8 to defend this pawn. I go king to e5 here. And here, they blundered with king to g5. And you can pause the video to solve a very simple tactic here. A very simple maneuver to just win the game immediately. Now, king to g5 is, I think, the worst move in the position because that just allows the move rook g7 check. And after the king moves anywhere, h6, h5, now I have rook g8. And you can't take this pawn because your rook is hanging, and the rook can't go anywhere. It's trapped. Because if it goes here, you get mated. You're getting mated like this. And if the rook moves here, we just queen again with a mate. And the rook controls all the other squares on the 8th rank. So after this position, my opponent resigned. And actually, I played this game with a 91% accuracy according to chess.com. It was just a simple game ever since this opening. And then they kind of just gave me everything I want, They started trading everything, made my life really easier. And then I just... So when you're the one with the isolated pawn, you don't want to be trading too much pieces. Because that means less defenders. And when there's less defenders, you can bring the king. Like, let's say queens are traded, and both rooks. Maybe there's only a knight against a bishop, and you have a king. The king can always end up on e5, and because this bishop is a dark squared bishop, the knight can eventually remaneuver itself to a spot where it just hits the d5 pawn here, like c3, b4, e3, f4. You get the point. Basically, they shouldn't have traded that light squared bishop as well. I think you should also keep the color of the isolated pawn, your bishop. Like, I think you should keep your light squared bishop in this case, because, it's a defender of this. But anyway, that is the end of the video, and bye.